Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thanks for downloading this edition of The Why Factor from the BBC, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it.
She shot away down the Mews, savouring the unfailing pleasure she always felt when setting off in the car alone.
Freedom, control, sometimes uncertainty and even a little danger. Agatha Christie captured the emotions of being behind the wheel in her novel The Hollow.
In that way, she could realise to the full the intimate personal enjoyment that driving a car brought to her. She enjoyed her own skill in traffic. She enjoyed nosing out new shortcuts out of London.
Why does driving a car come bundled up with ideas about fun, independence and thrill? Why is there even such a thing as a car culture? And with driverless cars being tested around the world, what's the future for the petrol heads? I'm Mike Williams and you're listening to The Why Factor on the BBC World Service.
I'm Eddie Jordan. I spent most of my entire life running around with Formula One cars and doing what I should do to create a winning structure, a winning team, and give people the joy and the satisfaction of achieving something.
Eddie was founder and owner of the Jordan Grand Prix Formula One team. When did you learn to drive?
I learned to drive when I was about 14.
14?
Yeah, and my initial foray into that was taking my father's car when he was playing golf. So I always went golfing with him, and he often wondered why. But I used to go to the locker room, pick the keys out of his pocket, and go off and have a drive for 2 or 3 hours. And that, for me, was just so exciting.
And illegal?
Totally illegal, and worse happened because I turned it over into a river, and then there were a lot of questions that I think I was banned from all activities other than study for the next year or so.
It's so exciting when you push your racing car. My name is Sabine Schmitz. I grew up at the famous Nürburgring. I'm a racing driver and since 6 months a Top Gear presenter.
Last year, the BBC announced that Top Gear had been sold to 214 territories around the world. Now Clarkson Free, the programme is destination TV for motorheads and for others too.
When you are in your car, it's like liberty for you. What you don't really need to know that it's €500,000 expensive, that you don't have to think about the money then. I enjoy it to push the car to the limit.
When I get in a car, I feel a different person. I feel that I'm now in control. I can turn on the music or I can turn it off. I can do all sorts of different things that I feel good about. When I was flat out with the Jordan team, I did have a driver, and that was one, to be able to make calls and to be able to receive calls and to be able to work in the car, not because I didn't want to drive. And I always felt cheated that there was a driver there taking the pleasure that I should be having. So when I get in a car, it has to be a fun experience.
But that fun experience can come at a price. The World Health Organization says that if the averages hold up, then just today, more than 3,000 people will die on the roads.
Driving is the most dangerous activity that you'll ever perform during the day.
Dr. Lisa Dawn is a psychologist and associate professor of driver behaviour at the UK's Cranfield University.
It's an incredibly skilled activity, and there's a lot that can go wrong.
I don't think I've ever met a driver who admitted that they were a really bad driver. We all seem to think that we're rather good at it.
Yes. Well, they can't all be right. The problem is that people have a very inflated sense of their own abilities and are overconfident in the skills that they have, which of course means that they can be quite biased in the fact that if they take those kind of risks, they'll get away with it.
Why do you think we're so overconfident, given the fact the task is so complex?
We are very resistant to criticism of our driving. And people can get very upset quite quickly if you pull them up on decisions that they've made. Everyone makes mistakes, but actually admitting to those mistakes is not something that human beings generally are very good at.
A gender difference there.
Definitely. We know in particular that young males are extremely confident in their driving, and What we also know is that within 6 months of passing their driving test, about 20% of them will be involved in a crash, which means that they're more likely to be killed and injured than any other driver group at any other time.
And when you're overconfident, what kind of bad decisions do people make?
If you put your foot down, perhaps to impress your mates, it's dark, a bend comes up. These are typical crashes that young people have. They're not looking properly and they don't see the bend, and they don't have the skills to actually be able to turn the wheel in time. They end up, unfortunately, at a tree or lamppost, sadly.
You're going to Terminal 5. Is that okay? Please board your pod for Terminal 5.
One possible solution could be to remove humans from the process altogether. What's happening?
The doors are closing. We're about to back out of the docking station. Press start.
This is Nick Reed from the UK's Transport Research Laboratory. It doesn't seem to want to move. Maybe it's just waiting for this one to come past.
Indeed. There you go. See? It knew more than we did.
Still not moving.
Just be patient. There we go.
We're at London's Heathrow Airport in a little pod. There's room for about 4 people and their luggage, but there are no controls, no accelerator or steering wheel, disturbingly no brakes. It's just running on its own little road with low concrete walls either side.
This vehicle is designed to be used in its dedicated infrastructure, linking us from Terminal 5 to the business car park.
Picking up some speed here.
Yeah.
What are we doing now? Probably about 20, 30 kilometres and 30 kilometres an hour, something like that?
Yeah, about that sort of speed, about 30 kilometres per hour, I'd say.
Obviously, if you put this thing on the street, it wouldn't know what to do, this particular pod that we're in at the moment. I mean, how will you have to modify it?
They'll need additional cameras, sensors and software. So there'll be lasers, cameras on board, and we will have mapped the environment where these vehicles will be operating. So a vehicle has already driven the routes they'll be following and created a 3D laser point map of the environment, which gives these vehicles a sense of where they are, an understanding of where they are, and how they can detect hazards, pedestrians, cyclists that they might encounter.
On average, people tend to commute not more than 1 hour.
Dr. Zia Wadood is an associate professor at the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds in the north of England, and he sees a possible future where the commute is very different.
Now, say 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when people were riding horses, they were maybe going 20 miles in that 1 hour. When speed increased with cars, then with train, people started to go longer. But still it was always within that 1 hour range. And the reason for that primarily was you cannot use your time productively, so that time is kind of lost. Whereas if it's a fully self-driving car where you don't have to give any input, then you can use your time productively. So using Facebook, sending emails. My son may start taking his meals in the car on the way to nursery. Myself taking a nap on the way back home, so I'm recharged to get some more work done or play more with my kids. Then the whole game of where you start to live, that will change. Where you start to work, that may change. So the possibilities are endless.
What do we gain if these things actually start to appear on our roads?
I think about safety. And we know that on the roads, 95% of incidents have a contributory portion of it is due to human error. So if we can start to use automation of the driving task as a way to address that error, that's one huge benefit we could achieve. You think about access to mobility, so that older travellers, disabled travellers could remain independently mobile for longer in their lives, make even more of a contribution to society, then that's an added benefit. And then we can look at the use of vehicles as a shared resource rather than personal cars. Might enable there to be greater mobility in cities, reduce congestion, or at least enable more journeys to be conducted with the same number of vehicles.
Do you like to drive?
I do like to drive from time to time. Increasingly, when I get onto the motorways, I think a computer could be doing this better than me, and my time could be spent more productively, more enjoyably, talking to my family or conversing with my friends using Skype or something. So people are starting to recognise that automation of the driving task is giving them options.
The traffic lights she was approaching had been green for some time. They were almost sure, she thought, to change before she got to them.
Agatha Christie also understood the frustrations of the driver and particularly of the passenger. In the future, it's possible that everyone in the car will be like John Christo.
She began to slow down. Still green. John Christo forgot his resolutions of keeping silent about Gerda's driving and said, "What are you stopping for?" "I thought the lights might change." The engine stalled. The lights changed. The cross-traffic hooted angrily. John said, "You really are the worst driver in the world, Gerda."
What kind of passenger are you when somebody else is behind the wheel of the car?
On a normal road, I'm not so relaxed, but on a racetrack, I'm a little bit more relaxed. It depends on the driver.
What happens when driverless cars become common?
I think that liberty is gone when you are in a driverless car. You're just like a passenger and you play with your iPhone or with your mobile phone and boring.
My name is Brian Fung. I'm a technology reporter for the Washington Post, and I've written about driverless cars a lot lately. Google wants to do a car that has no steering wheels, no brake pedals, no emergency brake, no gear shifter. Everything will be self-contained and controlled by the car itself.
Brian Fung had a chance to get behind the wheel of a Google car, or he would have if there'd actually been a steering wheel.
Well, the biggest thing you notice right off the bat is that the car accelerates a little bit more aggressively than a regular car might, and it brakes a little bit more aggressively than a regular car might. But other than that, it takes about 10 seconds for you to get pretty comfortable, and the car knew how to stop for red lights. It knew how to run through yellow lights. It could detect pedestrians and navigate its way around parked cars. At one point, it stopped to let an oncoming car pass because there wasn't enough room for two cars to be sharing the lane at the same time. All in all, it felt very similar to a regular car driving experience, and I think that's one of the most surprising and exciting things about it is just how mundane it was. Now, that's very different from what traditional automakers such as Ford or GM are trying to do. Those automakers believe that people will always want some amount of control.
The feds are now investigating a deadly crash and the circumstances that led up to it.
In May this year in the USA, a car made by Tesla crashed into a lorry while in autopilot mode. There was a man on board. He was in the driver's seat, but at the time of the crash, he was just a passenger.
In the wake of the May crash, they killed a Tesla enthusiast.
This may have been the very first time that a computer-driven vehicle was involved in a fatal accident. What we think happened here is that the Tesla was moving down the highway at speed, and a large tractor-trailer turned left in front of the Tesla, essentially blocking its way. But because the autopilot feature couldn't tell that the truck body was there, it couldn't detect the truck body against the bright light of the sky surrounding it, it didn't slow down, and the driver also did not depress the brake, which led to the car moving through the gap between the tractor-trailer's wheels, and the top of the car got crushed as it passed underneath the tractor-trailer. So it was a pretty gruesome collision, and the driver was killed.
There's a huge amount of research that needs to be done before we can even think about letting people into these sorts of vehicles.
I find them scary because I want to go from one lane to the other if I need to, and I don't need to be pulled back in because one eye in the front of the car is telling you that it's not safe to do so, because they can't see what I'm seeing, and I still have a concern about it.
Because if you imagine you're very passive as a passenger in a vehicle, everything's being taken care of. But then when you need to suddenly manually switch into driving yourself because of an emergency situation that perhaps the vehicle can't adapt to.
If you look at the approach Google are taking, they started off with humans taking control for some of the time and have gradually moved to their current range of vehicles, which is with no steering wheel, no controls at all, because they recognise that this process of having partial control of the vehicle by the human and transitioning from human to automated control represents that big challenge.
We need to trust that a self-driving car will get us there safely, but we also need to trust that the vehicle can watch over us and judge whether or not we are actually safe to take the controls. We shouldn't have the ability to make that decision ourselves because there are so many biases in the way that we think about our abilities that it would be foolhardy to let the human make that decision.
In the UK at least, on average, we drive 180 million miles between each fatal collision. And you're asking an automated system to perform at an even higher level than that, which is a big, big task.
We have to embrace technology, that's for sure. But there are certain parts of technology that need to be controlled and has to be put in its rightful position. This is one of them. There are some times that we have to say, whoa, stop. Let's have a look at this carefully and see what is the downside and what's the upside.
There is another problem that the driverless cars will have to solve, and it's as much an ethical dilemma as an engineering puzzle or a matter of algorithm design.
The vehicle would have to make a decision about which outcome is the most preferred, even when both of them might be a negative. If you're heading for a woman crossing the road with a pram, so your only option is that the vehicle veers off and hits something else, where that could mean that the driver or operator is injured. What decision does the vehicle take, and whose fault is that?
In the abstract, everyone tends to feel as though you should naturally save as many people as possible, which is quite a utilitarian choice, and it makes a lot of logical sense. But when you ask people to think of themselves in that position, everything kind of goes out the window very quickly, and you revert to a situation where the driver feels like, no, the car should definitely save me instead of the other people outside.
So do you save the driver or do you save the cyclist?
These are the dilemmas that the technology will have to deal with. As a very long tail of unlikely events, there are potentially millions of different scenarios.
Thanks for listening to The Y Factor. If you'd like to hear more episodes, there's a wide range of programmes on our website. Among them, violence, the rise of the robots, and the mysterious ways in which we perceive time. Visit bbcworldservice.com/Y Factor.